Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we are going to be taking a look at the Job Actions trailer for Final Fantasy XIV's next expansion, Shadowbringers. Now, the Job Action trailers are always one of the hypest things just before an expansion is about to come out. It's our first real peek at the new skills, and without any context, it's still super exciting to actually watch. Now that being said, while there is some information out from the live letter and of course the Job Action trailer, there are things you can discern from looking at the user interface and the job gauges. I do want to give you guys full disclosure before we start this video. I did attend the North American media tour for Final Fantasy XIV. What happens there is basically different media outlets and content creators on YouTube and Twitch are able to get our hands on an early build and actually got hands-on with a lot of the stuff that's available here in the Job Action trailer. But that stuff is under embargo until the morning of May 29th. And as such, I won't be talking about any of it here. I've got, tons of videos that are going to be coming out that morning as soon as the embargo is up. So hopefully you guys understand that, an embargo is a very serious deal. And as such, I'm going to have to do some editing for this video. I'm basically going to do the whole awkward stare thing at the end of every single job. And if I need to edit it, I will. If not, then we'll just go straight through in one take. But I sincerely doubt I'm going to get through this in one take without being displeased with the way that I describe certain things, because I got to keep my mouth shut. So we're going to tread through this very carefully, and I hope you guys understand. Now with that, we are going to get started with the Gunbreaker. You see, now that was the short little pause if I actually keep that in the video. But anyway, with Gunbreaker, first of all, they actually went into a lot of detail on Gunbreaker during the live letter, so it's one that we're not as in the dark as some of the other existing jobs that got changes. Now, for example, right here, as soon as we get started, we can see the job gauge in the bottom right, which we can explain in its entirety because they did go into full detail on it in the live letter. Now, the main part of it, the part in the center, is the same symbol as the tooltip that they hovered over for Royal Guard, which is Gunbreaker's tank stance. So it seems to just be an indicator of the actual tank stance being activated. As for the other two slots, those are your Gunbreaker's ammo. And when it was displayed in the live letter, finishing combos or executing certain skills would provide you with an ammo to then execute a more powerful skill with. So it didn't really appear to look like Dark Arts, which was the main thing that people were concerned about. It sounded like it, and honestly, the way that it functioned in Final Fantasy VIII was very much about timing. However, in the live letter, we saw him finish a 3-part combo, generate ammo, and then use it on certain skills. So with that, let's actually press the play button again. So he activates what we can assume is Royal Guard, and then uses a ranged attack, uses a gap closer, starts what looks to be a combo chain. Now, up here, he actually cast something on an ally right there. And you can also see that he got some sort of beneficial effect from that second swing, or it looked like he got some sort of beneficial effect from that second swing. Didn't generate any ammo or do anything else, so not much more we can really discern from that. But this skill we actually know about, the skill that he cast here on the Astro. It was another skill that they went over during the live letter, and it is basically a regen that the Gunbreaker can cast on themselves, and according to this Job Action trailer, on an ally as well. Now, after casting that, finishes the third chain of the combo, which again we saw during the live letter, and generates 1 ammo. Now, the Gunbreaker has 2 ammo and uses them both here in the trailer. Also, shoots another buff onto an ally. I don't know much about that one, but I don't think it was discussed in the live letter at all, but some sort of other buff on an ally. With the way that they describe tank changes, not too surprising to see a couple of those, but not much more I can say about that. So he uses one of the ammo to execute a stronger attack, and then does an AoE, I guess it's just an AoE of some kind right after that. And then starts using these follow-up attacks right here. Now, luckily, Yoshida actually showed us these follow-up attacks in the live letter itself. And basically, after activating one of the ammo skills, a bunch of other skills become available, and Yoshida began chaining them together. It was surprisingly fast-paced for, I guess, what the general pace is of Final Fantasy XIV combat overall, with him chaining this skill, then that skill, then this skill, then that skill, then this skill, then that skill. And it was something that's really satisfying to watch. And it also looks really cool when you're seeing it here in the Job Action trailer as well. But I believe that wraps it up for Gunbreaker here, so they didn't go too much into detail. Oh no, how could we forget one of Squall's finishing move? What's that one called again? Oh no, is that Blasting Zone? I'm trying to remember the name of Squall's finishers, because he's got quite a few of them, and he has them in the City of Omnia as well. I think that one's called Blasting Zone? Is it Is it rough? No, because Rough Divide is a different one. I think it's Blasting Zone. I think that's Blasting Zone for that last one right there. But then that's all they show. Now, also, it's worth noting that you can actually see this very briefly. If you pay very close attention to the target dummy, you can see that occasionally it has the animation for taking damage over time. It's a little bit easier to see right here at the end. Well, it was easier to see right there at the end. Let me just, I guess, go back a little bit. So if you pay attention, there's an animation for when an enemy is actually taking damage over time. So it appears that something is actually causing it to take damage over time right here. Now, if you look early on in the video, I guess you have to look for when the effect first starts appearing. So if we go all the way back, you can see that that little animation isn't taking place here. Just gonna, I guess, let it play out one more time because this is the last little detail that we'll analyze from the job action trailer. So still not seeing it, still not seeing it. Still not seeing it. And there. So you saw it for the first time. There's a little tiny explosion right there. So if you can pull anything from this, it looks like the AoE might also have a dot attached to it just by looking at the little animation. This is how we usually break down job action trailers, just looking for little things like that. You can also listen for the sound effect of a combo, which allows you to determine a lot of the other things that we're going to be discussing here in the job action trailer. And with that, we'll let it play out for the rest because it's not too much longer, and then we'll move on into job number 2, which is going to be the Bard. Awkward pause, number 2. Anyway, Bard, a little bit harder to discern exactly what's going on. You can see, you know, another buff on themselves. You can see Ballad, of course, ticking down. So this seems immediately my first takeaway from this is the song structure is going to stay somewhat the same because it still has the 30 seconds of Mage's Ballad ticking through little harp animation. So we can at least presume that the basis of what made the 4.0 Bard is still present. There is something worth noting, though, that the straight shot part of the job UI is not there. So that, of course, has a lot of people asking questions if it's just not present, or if it's not actually going to be part of the job anymore. There is, however, a new gauge, and in the live letter they called it the Soul Gauge, and they said it would be able to be used to execute more powerful actions, which we do eventually see here in the job action trailer overall. Now, upon pressing play, you can see Bloodletter, you can see, you know, applying some dots, you know, those are standard, whatever, and they get a Bloodletter proc, so they got a Bloodletter proc, that's cool. Did it actually strum? I didn't see if they kept the animation for the Bloodletter proc for it, for the harp strumming, because that's normally what happens when you get a proc. It actually strums. Is it just me, or did it not strum? Because they definitely did 2. Maybe it's just, maybe I'm just missing it, because there's a Bloodletter. Either that, or it would have to have a shorter Bloodletter cooldown. So maybe it's just not, like, playing properly here, but they most definitely do 2 Bloodletters pretty close back to back. Now, also, they actually are generating some stacks right here. So they used Barrage into Refulgent. Now, let me go back and look, because I'm trying to determine, because they could have just given them a Refulgent proc. It wouldn't have surprised me too much, but they're usually fairly accurate when it comes to these sorts of things. And I don't know if I see a heavy shot anywhere here. So that's something that could be of a potential change as well in the means through which you actually access Refulgent Arrow, because it looks like they do 2 Bloodletters, 2 dots, swap over to Army's Paean, then grant themselves, what was that buff? I don't know Bard animations all too well, so they have another thing that they cast on themselves right there, and I don't know if that's Raging Strikes, as I'm not all too familiar. It probably would be. And then they do Barrage, and then immediately into Refulgent Arrow. They also fire off this new skill right here, which not really much we can pull from that because it just seems to get used. So there's not really much to pull away from that being used. Just some new, what it appears to be an AoE skill. If that's not an AoE skill, I think most people would be fairly surprised because it appears to be hitting in a large area around it. Also went through the 3 songs, Wanderer's Minuet. Also had what looked to be a new shot there, unless that's Heavy Shots animation. I'm just so unfamiliar with it. It's very glowy for a heavy shot, you know, and then fires off a Pitch Perfect, and then uses 25 of that Soul Gauge to fire off this giant arrow going forward. So it looks like the core identity of what Bard has been adjusted, but there's questions about things like straight shot, heavy shot, and I guess other minor aspects of it. Bloodletter, not really seeing the strumming of the actual UI right there was a little bit awkward, but Either way, I'm glad that it looks like Bard is largely remaining the same, because I didn't want Bard to really change that much going into 5.0. I felt like 4.0, they finally nailed it. So while they listed it as one of their more minor rework jobs, it doesn't really show here, because it still seems to be at least maintaining the majority of its identity from 4.0 based on what you can see in the job action trailer. With that, we move on into what is classically Bard's most popular ally, and that of the Dragoon. We did learn during the live letter the piercing buff will go away, so it's kind of almost poetic that they're right next to each other in the actual video right here. And with that, that's our cut point. Dragoon here, there's a few pretty decent takeaways. For one, Dragoons immediately made sure I noticed this. Like, wait, Blood of the Dragon is instantly 30 seconds? So that was the first thing every Dragoon made sure that I noticed. We can also see most major thing, the jump animation being faster again. They've sped it up so many times over the years, but it's very clearly a faster jump animation. Yoshida even confirmed this in the live letter. Now also, you can see another Mirage dive. You can see, what's it called? A Dragon Fire dive. And then you can see him doing the AoE combo that the Dragoons currently have. And if you listen here, you can hear the combo sound effect. So it looks like there's now a third part to the AoE rotation based on the sound effects that would play if we had the sound on. On top of that, it looks like the third piece of that AoE actually extends Blood of the Dragon as well. Now, he opened one eye with that first Mirage dive after the jump before, and now is going through another standard combo. This is all stuff you've seen on the Dragoon before, the 4-part combo, the 5-part combo, not doing his positionals, what a boss. Now that one right there, I don't recognize. So there's just some additional attack right there that I can't really discern anything else from. Now doing the other combo, the other major combo, and then doing another jump here, then doing a Mirage dive, then a Shears Kogel, into an Astrond, into a backflip, into, now, in Nidhogg's encounter, that attack is called Final Chorus, so it's currently presumed that that would be the same name that it would go through here, but it is essentially the attack from Nidhogg's encounter. If you haven't done Nidhogg's encounter from patch 3.3, I don't know why you're watching this, but you need to really go back and do it, because it's a pretty important one, I'd say, at the very least. And that's actually where the Dragoon section ends for this video. So, again, very much the same. You see things that are still very familiar. Enhancing the AoE rotation with a third part appears to be a big deal. Also having the ability to extend Blood of the Dragon. Blood of the Dragon starting at 30 seconds, faster jumps. And I feel like, is there anything that I missed with this? No, because that did that. No, I don't think I missed anything. They did also say in the live letter that heavy thrust is gone, and again, I did say that during the live letter they said the piercing debuff is gone. So the fact that Litany and I aren't here has been a little concerning for people. It could just be they're deciding not to show it because it's not important, but with the removal of 2 other buffs, you'd like to hope that those buffs would remain intact, because Dragoon can't have all of the things that it did for the party members removed. So with that, we can wrap up the Dragoon section and move on over into Black Mage. Now for the Black Mage section, Yoshida himself actually played Black Mage on the live letter and described quite a few of the new skills, and said that Black Mage really hasn't changed. They just fixed a lot of the things that made it, I guess, some of the frustrations of it. For example, one of the first skills he showed off on Black Mage was actually Umbral Soul, which he did hover over the tooltip, so we know the name of it. And it actually was instantly recharging his ice form to max duration, and also generating an Umbral Heart. So it kind of reminds me of like Monk's form shifts and meditation style gameplay, where if there's no targets to hit, instead of transposing, you can sit in that Blizzard stance so that you can just open up on the enemy in the most optimal way. Another thing mentioned in the live letter is specifically changing between forms not costing MP. Now later in the live letter he specifically shows Blizzard 3 not costing MP, but I don't remember if he shows Fire 3 not costing MP. Specifically saying when switching forms would imply that it's there to counteract the MP ticks, which were always a major annoyance with Black Mages in the past. So going back and starting over, you can see casts the new Umbral Soul right here and refills the duration, puts down ley lines, and then immediately starts casting the fire. Wait, did he? Wait a minute. Hold on. I feel like I missed something here. Because, wait. So he does Umbral Soul, does ley lines, and then, wait, you're just in fire all of a sudden. Wait. Hold on. I feel like I'm missing something here. Whoa. Umbral Soul, ley lines. Is that... Did I miss something here? Did he just go fire? I don't think, did I miss like a transpose or something? Because he was just at 3 stacks. Is it, okay, did he just use, is it just me, or does it look like did he just use Fire 4 to change forms? Maybe that would be why he didn't say anything about Fire 3 before. Am I bugging? I feel like I'm bugging. No, he used Fire 3 that time, but he most certainly, when he laid down his ley lines, just instantly went to fire when casting fire. Alright, whatever. I don't know what the heck's going on. So I don't play Black Mage, I'm just gonna leave it. Also used Freeze to actually swap forms right there. Not only showing that Freeze stayed in the game, but I guess Freeze had its... Oh, it also generated an Umbral Heart, it looks like. So upon using Freeze, not only did it swap forms, but it also generated an Umbral Heart, which may be good for... I guess Black Mages tell me, what would you use Freeze for? If you could change form with Freeze and generate an Umbral Heart, would you use that in an AoE rotation? Black Mage experts, yell at me in the comment section, please. On top of that, so now just casting Fire 4s. Of course, if you look at the UI gauge, you can also see that you have 2 stacks of Polyglot. This was something they made sure to mention often during the live letter. And right now, he's just going through some Fire 4s right now, another Blizzard 3, and then casting a Blizzard 4 to show it still generates 3 Umbral Hearts. Casting Thunder, you know, not anything too fancy there. Fire 3 to go back to the other form. Then he's casting another Fire 4, casting... Now, that's a new spell they actually did talk about during the live letter called Despair. It was described as the single target flare. So we can assume that a lot of the properties that it shows would be very much the same. During the live letter, you can see that it has a cost of his whole MP bar of 10,000. Now, Flare operates the same way whenever you actually have a full MP bar. It'll just show whatever number of current MP you have. But being a single target flare, in their own words, would mean that it probably just entirely takes what's it called? I guess the properties of it. So I would just expect it to be acting entirely the same based on MP. Another thing, I immediately look at that and think, well, if it's not going to cost MP to actually change forms, then using something like that towards the end of your fire rotation, I mean, I'd have to imagine that'd be a nice way to burn what little bit of MP you might actually have left if it's going to cost you nothing to actually change forms. So that would be my first interpretation as someone who doesn't really understand Black Mage, but maybe that's not actually what it's used for. Now then uses, casts Foul, and then immediately after uses an ability they hovered over during the live letter called Xenoglossy. And they said it is an instant cast way of using your Polyglot. And since they hovered over the tooltip, it showed that it was actually a very high potency as well. So it appeared based on the tooltip that not only is Foul meant to be kind of the AoE Polyglot thing, but that this new ability, Xenoglossy, is not only instant, but is also meant to be the single target way that you are going to use your Polyglot stacks. So very interested to see how that actually pans out. It means that you now have more options for single target and more options for AoE, but it really looks like they mostly provided more power into those single target boss rotations based on the things we learned from the live letter, Yoshida himself, and the things we see here in the job action trailer. Now moving forward, we now have our next job here, which is going to be the Astrologian. Now for the Astrologian, man, this is probably one of the hardest things to break down because there's a lot of things here. Now, the first thing I was told to look at, I didn't notice this when I watched the job action trailer until somebody pointed it out to me after the live letter. That is most definitely the arrow, and it says the bowl. Now, I've done the media tour twice now, and I've seen mistakes like this or typos like this, so it could just be a typo. It's hard to imagine, especially lore-wise, that they'd rename all of the cards. So take that as you will, but it's hard to really take that seriously, and all the cards end up having the wrong names here. So again, we don't know if that's a typo, if they've actually relabeled the various cards. Now another thing is, you'll notice that there is not a timer on the job gauge. There's these 3 little diamonds over the actual thing, and there's nothing to actually say like 150%, 50% AoE, those indicators that we have now. There's not even an indication of where your spread card is. So the UI is completely different, and the means through which you actually use the cards appears to be incredibly different as well. So they immediately pull the bowl, and upon playing it on the red mage over here, it generates a seal inside of this right here, like a little moon seal right here. And then they use some other skill, and then immediately go about drawing a ton of cards. They draw the spear, and play it on the ninja. They draw the arrow and play it on the white mage. And then they draw another arrow and actually convert it into the Lord of Crowns. And then upon using it, they use it on themselves. And then they remove all of those like moon and sun whatever seals and marks that they have. And they do some sort of AoE. And then they cast what we can assume is Malefic and the new dot, or what's it, Combust. It's Malefic and Combust, another tier of those. So moving on forward, DPS skills, and then just some circular buff around themselves. Now, is that new? Or again, I don't main some of these jobs, so you guys are going to have to yell at me occasionally if I don't recognize these animations. So I'm assuming that that's new right there. And then they play some sort of effect on the ninja over in the distance. You see that right there. I feel like is that not Sinistry? Yeah, that's Sinistry. I just cast a heal on the red mage. I was going to say, I know that animation. And then they cast, looks to be an aspected Helios, and then they have some other AoE, I guess, heal that they follow up with, and that's the end of it. All right, so the card thing is really the big takeaway. The rest just look like higher tier versions of existing spells. They use Sinistry again, and I noticed the animation on both of them. I don't know if having an animation on both people healed is new, but other than that, the card thing is really the big takeaway. There was no spreading or royal roading or anything, just straight up playing cards on individual people, which would make the job a lot more active. Right now we pretty much only fish for AoE balances, and if you get something else, whatever, you do whatever you can with it. But the idea of having some availability like that and having to, I guess, manage the cards a little bit more would, I guess, add a more active role. But how quickly they were drawing the cards, we have to presume that the ability they use right beforehand would be something that allows for that. Because if you're always able to play cards that fast, that would be ridiculous. So Astro looking good with the changes. I've always been a big fan of Astro, and so having something like this is always fun. You can see that little dot tick animation that we mentioned back in the Gunbreaker section on the training dummy from one of the 2 offensive spells that the Astro cast. That's the end of the Astro section. So with that, let's move on over into Samurai. So for the Samurai section, during the live letter, they said Samurai remained mostly the same. They said they just wanted to take its core identity and just, roll with it and just make it, better and make it evolve a little bit, but not anything too game-changing compared to some of the other jobs. So the first thing we see right here is that they use one skill, generate a little bit of Kenki, but then instantly use a skill that gave them a ton of Kenki again. Now, normally we would affiliate this with Hagakure, but if it is Hagakure, that would mean Hagakure went through the change of not eating your sens. Now, they did make mention of something along those lines during the live letter of making it so you can get to those powerful Madares more often. So they may have made an adjustment to Hagakure to actually do that instead of absorbing sens to actually generate Kenki. Now, going a little bit further right here, you can see just generating a few of the sens. There you go. You get a Kaiten, you get a Higanbana, which we're all used to seeing. You get a what's it called? A Mekyo Shix. What's it called? Mekyo Shiksui. I should know this. I played Final Fantasy XI, and I leveled Samurai last year. And then buffs himself with some other skill. Goes about generating some sens. Uses that looked like a Shinten. That was a Gecko. That was a Yukikaze. And then executes them with what looks to be a new spender for the Samurai. That was a brand new animation versus the animation we have for what was the other one called? I see. I don't know the names of all the Samurai skills. The old massive spender that had, was it like, I think it was Guren or something before. I don't know. It's something along those lines. But it didn't look like it. That's all I'm trying to say. It didn't look like the spender. If you go back and look at the Stormblood action trailer, didn't look like the same thing. So then this part got people hyped. Does a Kaiten and then a Madare Setsugeka, and then does another Madare Setsugeka, which is interesting to say the least. Now channeling Meditate, getting some of the Kenki back, but then immediately goes off into a new attack. A lot of people are speculating that this may be a finisher that's being tied to meditate, which would be a pretty cool thing in all honesty. The idea of actually, like, as soon as a boss reappearing, being able to use a skill while you've been recharging that meditate, it adds a little bit of a skill ceiling to meditate, because really understanding the duration of it versus the duration of not having a target to hit becomes a very integral part to Samurai's DPS. So hopefully that is going to be the way that that works. And with that, I think that that's all they have for the Samurai section. Again, doesn't really appear much different, just shoring up the things that Samurai was already kind of doing. And my cat has decided to join the video and chomp on his breakfast, so excuse me if he starts meowing during the video. But with that, we can move on into the next job, and that is going to be the Warrior. Alright, so for the Warrior section of the video, this one, there's not really a whole lot to take away from it. You know, it uses what looks to be like a newer version of Inner Beast. At least that's the animation that it looks like to me. So he immediately infuriates to get Gauge, and then uses, look at this. Like, that's like the Inner Beast animation, but like flashier. It's also worth noting that he's not in a tank stance right now. You see it activates Defiance right there, and you can see the Gauge actually transform. So then starts going through the usual combo, you know, whatever generates. I don't know if the generation was a little different there. And then cast what looks to be like an Infuriate on the ally. We were never given any context for the rest of this little showcase of what that actually did. But they cast something on an ally. We saw the Gunbreaker do something similar, so we can assume that it probably is a somewhat similar effect. More of these party helping tools than just showcasing that Warrior and Gunbreaker are going to have these things. Now also uses Overpower, but then immediately follows up with this new AoE spin attack. Now again, if you have the audio on, you can actually hear the combo sound effect, implying that Warrior has gotten a second part to its AoE combo, one that also generated a bit of Gauge. So again, it seems like a major theme since the Dragoon section is that they're adding more AoE combos to the jobs and making it so they interact with the Gauge, so it feels better when you're doing your AoE rotation. You don't have to bounce back and forth between single target certain things and AoE things just to maintain certain buffs or actually get ready for boss or output the most amount of damage. And I'm definitely a big fan of that. Also, it's just a cool animation. Now, they also use what's that called? Decimate? Again, it's not Steel Cyclone. Yeah, Decimate, Decimation? Decimate, I think it's called. And then uses Inner Release. You know, we should all be familiar with this part right here, showcasing that the Fellcleave dreams are still very much alive for those of you who still liked Inner Release. And upon it wearing off, they use Infuriate and use, now that kind of is like Inner Beast, which looks like, that looked like a supercharged version of Steel Cyclone. So if that is the case, they did say that they were adding a skill that was stronger than Fellcleave. Now, we do see after they Infuriate the first time, he uses a new skill. And after he Infuriates the second time, he uses a new skill. And that's right after we had already seen that he actually has access to the Decimate skill. So people have been speculating about how they're gaining access to the skill, if it's tied to a separate action altogether, if it's tied to Infuriate. But there's not much you can really tell from this. That's why the Warrior section of this job action trailer is kind of underwhelming, because you can't really tell how Warrior got to access almost every single one of its skills, or the effect that it actually had. So other than a statement that they now have a skill that's even stronger than Fellcleave, and seeing Inner Release still the same, seeing they have a buff for an ally, and seeing they have a second part to their AoE combo, it's hard to really get crazy excited about Warrior's section of the job action trailer. So with that, we're just going to move on to the next section, which, if we press the play button, is Red Mage. Red Mage, I'm just going to continue on. It's another job they said really didn't change a whole lot. So if we actually watch this, we can see what looks to be, so you can see Impact being cast right after that other skill. So those two abilities that they start off with seem to be slightly different versions of other skills that we already had. But you can see almost like this circular wind animation around what we would originally assume is for Arrow, followed up by an Impact. And then you see this, what looks to be a new Thunder animation, which you can very clearly see the circle around, also followed up by another Impact. So that, to me, based on the generation of the actual Gauge plus the little circular AoE around it, would tell me that they're new AoEs for Red Mage. And then on top of that, then we just see mostly the standard Red Mage stuff. You also have another skill right there. So if we go back a little bit, a Gauge spender that is from range, just 10 gauge for a ranged attack. We don't have any other indication of how it impacts the actual Red Mage's gameplay. We don't know if it's a ranged, just a ranged option. We don't know if it provides them with some sort of, I guess, benefit going into the next ability. But then immediately they follow that up with just, I guess, their standard animation. You know, there's the Ver Arrow, and now they've got the Ver Thunder. There was no Ver Fire or Ver Stone, a lot of people noticed, so big question marks about that. They then go in for their combo. Now, we were told during the live letter that they were given now another skill, and they hovered over it. It was called Engagement, and it said specifically when they hovered over it that it shared a cooldown with Displacement. And so they said that they pretty much laughed at how a lot of times Red Mages will go in to do their melee combo, and they'll go to do the backflip from Displacement, and they'll find themselves maybe in an uncomfortable position at the bottom of Titan's Arena or off the edge of something like Suzaku. So this is meant to be an option, so you don't have to worry about that as much. And you can see it right here, just using it in melee range, so you don't have to die. Using the double mana skill, I think that's Manification, if I'm remembering correctly. Going into their melee combo, hard to see if there's really anything different here. And then immediately going into the backflip, which means Manification, if Engagement and Displacement are, of course, sharing cooldown, as we were told during the live letter, that would have to mean that Manification's keeping its effect that resets that, which makes sense. It doesn't really come off as something that should really be changed, I suppose. And then you can see immediately after the backflip right here, you know, the usual expected thing that a Red Mage is going to do next, which is going to be cast Ver Holy. And then immediately this new spell that follows it. We don't know anything really, I guess, about that, unless they mentioned it in the live letter and I missed it, but it's just another new skill at the end of the Ver Holy. So either follows up the Ver Holy, or they're just showing off a new skill at the very end. Did it generate any mana? It looks like it generated 7 for both. So new skill that generates 7 for both, and they did it at the end. So take from that what you will. Now, I'm, of course, always hyped for the monk section. But honestly, I mean, there's new animations, but it was kind of hard to, I guess, really tell too much. You know what? No, there's quite a few things you can glean from the job action trailer, I feel. So first of all, we already know from the live letter that Shoulder Tackle now is one of the new charged actions, which means that it actually like accumulates charges that you can then use at your leisure, giving it a bit more flexibility and not just using it on cooldown and then never being able to use it as a gap closer because you're trying to, you know, hold it, or you're trying to, you know, use it as often as possible to make sure that you actually are getting the damage from it and not delaying your DPS. So goes Fist of Fire here at the very beginning, and then Shoulder Tackles in. Also starts with a Demolish, an Arm of the Destroyer, and then a new AoE Circle Kick, and then follows up with Rock Breaker. So because he did Arm of the Destroyer into this AoE kick into Rock Breaker, it would appear that they've given the Raptor form a new AoE, which makes sense. Again, they've been streamlining the AoE rotations across all the other jobs we've gotten to at this point, so it makes sense that there would be a new AoE option for them in order to, you know, flow through an AoE rotation if they actually want to do it. The question is, Arm of the Destroyer? As a monk, I don't have much of a love for Arm of the Destroyers, so we'll see about that one. Now, on top of that, you just saw Perfect Balance immediately goes into a Snap Punch and into our very own Tornado Kick. Now, right after that, goes into a Demolish, and then goes into another Snap Punch, and then activates. Now, that is the animation for Fist of Wind, which then, when you look at the gauge on the left, as soon as he casts Fist of Wind, you see it right here, the Grease Lightning gauge goes up to 4 and then immediately begins charging some sort of new skill. They mentioned this in the live letter and said, maintaining your stacks and generating stacks when there's no targets around. So this new skill, if there are no targets to hit and you have no stacks because you just tornado kicked at the end of an enemy jumping away, instead of waiting for the enemy to come back and, form changing over to Demolish, so you have to make sure that you're always on that Coral Stance skill. Instead, now we have this new charge skill. It's almost like the monk equivalent of Samurai's Meditate. Although I don't think we see any sort of follow-up skill to it. He just gets the max stacks right here, and then was that an auto attack animation or a boot shine? It looked like, I think that's a boot shine. Yeah, except you're supposed to do that from the rear. So I think it would, no, I don't know. I can't remember. I don't remember Boot Shine's animation for some reason. I'm a Lalafell. It's kind of tiny. I assume it's a Boot Shine into Twin Snakes, into Demolish, and then into a Dragon Kick, and then into Riddle of Fire, into this new kicking animation, which again, we can't really glean any information about it, into a new chakra spender, which looks to be a giant Hadouken. A lot of people are hoping this is an AoE chakra spender. It's something I really want to be, because obviously with TP going away, purification is kind of useless, so getting an AoE chakra spender would be dope, especially with the streamlining they appear to be doing from the job action trailer into AoE rotations. With that, that's the monk section. Pretty hype, but we're going to have to wait until Wednesday to go into the full details on that one. Now, moving on into the next job, we have the Paladin. Paladin, a lot of people ask me, well, the first thought is they have a gap closer. I think everyone can take that away immediately, which was kind of teased at the Korean producer live letter that happened about a week ago. They asked about a charging Paladin and said, man, it's almost like there's like a new expansion coming out soon. There might be some new skills or something. But when the last time they did that, it was the whole male Vieira. Let's not talk about that. A lot of people pointed out to me in this trailer that there were no partners available. That would imply, some people thought that maybe meant that Paladin wouldn't have things like cover or intervention anymore. For me, they really only have other players there when they want to show off new elements of a job that that require an ally. So if Paladin doesn't have new things that require allies, then it makes sense to me that they wouldn't show those off here. Seems like they're much more focused on actually showing off the new stuff instead of just rotating through the old stuff, depending on the jobs that we're actually looking at. Now, so Paladin charges in and then goes into Shield Oath, immediately does Total Eclipse, and then with the combo sound effect goes into what looks to be another AoE. Again, we saw that Warrior had another AoE following Overpower, so this kind of fits into the trend that streamlining AoEs. They also go into combo here. They use a Sheltron, they use a Riot Blade, they use, what was that, Awareness? I don't even know. And then they go into a Royal Authority, and then they go into this new uppercut animation. It's like a combination of the uppercut and the Riot Blade animation. It's just a new skill. We don't. It's hard to really tell what that skill actually does. Now, during the live letter, they mentioned that something called Riot Sword would actually allow you to instant cast some of your MP costing skills on Paladin. Some people have suspected maybe that was Riot Sword because it's only a loose translation instead of directly assuming that it's Riot Blade. Immediately following that animation is Request Cat, and then we're following Request Cat, which I know it's not called that, but I call it that. You see all these instant cast spells that the Paladin can cast. What looks to be, you know, the first two we're very familiar with the Holy Spirit and the Clemency. This appears to be more of an AoE one, and then you have this final one at the end here, which looks dope as hell. It's also got a circle on the ground. Anytime I see the big circle on the ground, I like to just assume something's AoE. I feel like it's a safe gamble most of the time. So you see that big thing right there, and then you see another big a sword come out of the ground right there. So if it's all being done with Request Cat, if we can assume that all 4 abilities are being done under Request Cat, it just looks like they gave them some new spells. And other than that, there's not really too much that we can take away from that. Just Paladin got some new skills. And did they change the way that the gauge worked at the very least? I'm trying to see if they changed the way that the Paladin gauge works. So they activate Shield Oath, they do the AoE. The AoE doesn't generate any shield gauge. That doesn't generate any shield gauge. That doesn't generate any. They use the buff, and then they do the Royal Authority, and that generated shield gauge. And the new uppercut didn't generate. So there's just, I don't know. It could just be the blocking, but they didn't block at any point here, so that would have to imply that at the very least Royal Authority generates shield gauge, and the only other reason maybe they didn't is that it's maintained its old effect. Previously, Shield Oath only generated shield gauge when you blocked, so it could just be that it functions the same way, and that's why the shield gauge only goes up from a single skill across the entirety of the Paladin job action section. So with that, I think we can wrap up with this and move on to Ninja. So I had 2 favorites when I saw this job action trailer for the first time, and Ninja was my second favorite one that I saw in this job action trailer. As someone who's despised the job in in Stormblood, there were so many takeaways from the Ninja section that just seemed like massive improvements to the gameplay overall. So let's take a look at what this section actually offers. So immediately going in, they start by casting Hutan. Now immediately people notice that goes into Tenchi Jin, and that the Ninki gauge did not go down. That would imply that either it's involved with Hutan or just doesn't cost Ninki anymore. So that's immediately a big change for ninjas overall, if it is the case. Then goes through Tenchi Jin. So that's the same. So if you didn't like it before, you probably won't like it again. But then instantly does a skill that generates 40 Ninki. Now, previously, I think Mug was the only skill they had that generated a large amount of Ninki like that. That large of an amount at the very least. And so they have a new way of generating Ninki for themselves, and they can just use it. Okay. They use Suiton, but they don't actually show Trick Attack in this. I've seen some people comment on the Suiton here, which gets placed. They notice that there's bubbles around the ninja. So some people are assuming that maybe it has something to do with Suiton, but we'll just have to wait and see on that one. So then we know something new about Kasatsu, which was the skill they just used right there. We know it's one of the charged actions, so you can actually hold up to 2 charges of Kasatsu, so you can use it at more opportune times. Right after that, we see some new ninjutsu skills. We see what looks to be a super Katan, uses Kasatsu again, and then what looks to be almost like a super Hyotan. So that turns into like a bunch of mini shurikens. So I know everyone's super excited to see about that, but I mean, they have new ninjutsu, so I've seen people suspect that maybe one of those symbols was different. Watching it again, you can actually see the symbols that a ninja is using. You can see it like lights up around the outside, and you can still see that there's only 3 symbols around them. So if it is a 4th mudra, that would be incredibly strange. But looking at the combinations of these symbols, if you recognize them from the actual hotbar, most people have recognized that these are the combinations for Katan and Hyotan. So that says a lot about what could potentially be happening with ninjutsu for ninja right here. What it would be for any other job. They also got looks to be a follow-up to their AoE that actually generated Ninki. You can see they jump forward upon you. Now this is the first thing I know. So I hated Ninki in Stormblood. As soon as the ninja used what's it called? Death Blossom there, they gained 8 Ninki. I hope that it wasn't just an auto attack at the same time, and that it is that Ninki has moved over to weapon skills, because it's just ugh. And then you see that same thing. It goes up by 2 there, then spends 80. And now this is where I really started to feel like Ninki had to be changing over to this. Had to be changing over to weapon skills, because they use 80 Ninki, and we were told about this shadow clone very briefly in the live letter, just that the acknowledgement of getting it. Upon spending the 80 Ninki, you see that like there's like a shadow following the weapon skills, almost I guess like just like half a second before your animations. But the big thing is how much Ninki is being generated right here. If you watch it very carefully, as I said, the animation of the shadow is about half a second behind. And if you look at the gauge, if we go like frame by frame, which I think is this button, if you go frame by frame when a weapon skill is actually used, you can kind of see that the gauge jumps up in sections of 8 on a delay. So maybe I should have paused it closer to the next actual weapon skill, because I just keep getting loading screens trying to do this. Let me actually go forward a little bit faster. Come on, me. This is what I get for trying to do something frame by frame in a live recording. Well, it's not a live recording, I'm live right now, but, you know. Come on. Okay, here we go. Now we're getting into the next weapon skill. So you see it's at 36. I'm just jumping ahead like 5 frames. Okay, that's a little bit too much. So you see, for a few frames, it's at 44. And then about, a couple frames, literally like 2 frames later, it's actually 52. So if the shadow is allowing for better Ninki generation, that would be my first guess based on the kind of delayed reaction of the generation right there. So you can see it. Look, bam, bam. It jumps up twice every time you attack with the shadow. Literally every time. They use it again. That's the animation for Bavakakra, and then it's over. Either way, that looked dope. I thought the ninja section looked dope. And if they fixed Ninki being on the weapon skills, that's a huge thing. Because I hated that. I just really hated it on ninja in 4.x. Moving on to the next section, we have White Mage. One of the ones people are paying the most attention to, and it's hard to really say much about it here. So first and foremost, you notice that the Lily gauge has 3 lilies right off the bat at the start of this recording. And throughout using certain skills, lilies are actually used up, and you can see a blood lily begin to form. During the live letter, we were told that the Lily gauge no longer procs on certain skills and instead just generates over time as you're actually going throughout a fight. And then as you use them, you generate a blood lily, you nourish the blood lily, and then you can actually execute a powerful offensive attack. That is directly from the live letter. So that's like really the only thing. You can see some new animations. They made specific mention during the live letter, like, where's the big stone, you know? You can see just what appear to be offensive actions that are not stone or arrow appear to be getting used there. And other than that, it's just a bunch of like AoE healing skills or some certain skills being used by the Blood Lily as well. And also the wings. Big wings. That's it. Big wings. What they do, who knows? Big wings. Another instant cast, and then I think that was a Tetra. And then you saw if you go back to the beginning of the gauge, you can see this, there's like a Blood Lily, as they called it in the live letter right here. And upon casting a spell on the target dummy, it disappears, and offensive action. So we can't really tell what happened to White Mage, other than lilies aren't pointless anymore. So lilies aren't pointless anymore. Woo-hoo! We're going to move on to the next job with that. Next job is the final healer to be showed in this, and that is the Scholar. Now, I don't know about you, I had a kind of a hard time telling what's going on. I don't know, maybe it's just because the healers show off a lot of healing skills. It's kind of hard to tell what's actually happening here. Now, if we actually look at the actions, for one, you can see that they do indeed still have these Ether Flow stacks. They still have the Fairy Gauge, so those UI elements are the same. You can see some familiar skills right out of the gate, of course. You can see we have a Fairy. We know there were some changes to the pet actions. In fact, during the live letter, they said there's no functional difference between Eos and Selene anymore, and that they were just basically Scholar's closest thing to Eggy Glam. You just choose whichever fairy you think actually looks prettier. So they put on the crit debuff that we've all been used to for quite some time now. They cast what looks to be a new Broil. They look what cast to be a new Dot. Now we can tell it's a Dot again because of the animation of the Dot. Always keep an eye out for this during job action teasers. Now, other than that, we see, I think they just used Ether Flow for the first time right there. Yep, that's the Ether Flow animation. And then whatever that did, just some sort of buff on the Scholar themselves. And then they cast an Adlo on the target. And then they commanded, so that's using the new pet command action. Basically what they did is they told us that, at least for the Summoner, I guess they didn't actually show us this for Scholar. They told us for Summoner, they kind of like consolidated the actions into one assault button. And with both Eos and Selene having the same power now, based on what they said, we have to assume they did something similar for Scholars as well. But you see the Scholar tell the Fairy to execute an action right there. So if we, okay, we'll get into that in a second. You can see that the Scholar does a little animation. So I guess this is the Adlo. And you see the Scholar, like, does an animation that has a giant fairy ring around it, and then the fairy casts ability. Now, this ability, they specifically called to the live letter, they called her Seraph, summoning a Seraph. We saw the gauge for the fairies jump up. Also, did that skill cost? Yes, it did. That skill did cost fairy gauge. That command that the Scholar told the fairy to do actually cost 20 gauge as well. They summoned Seraph. It generated 50 gauge and gave you a 20-second timer on Seraph, who just is like a super fairy, it looks like. You can see casting, looks to be a little barrier around the target over on the left. It looked like the Scholar just used XCOG on themselves, which generated more fairy gauge, and then commanded Seraph to do something else, and then spent 20 gauge to command Seraph to do something else. You can see what looks to be barriers forming around people here. When the Scholar does it, you see the little, like, flash around them, like little shells around them, and then Seraph leaves and your old fairy comes back. Again, other than seeing that there's a lot more involvement with the fairy, we can't really, I guess, derive too much from that. There was a new buff that we couldn't really tell what it did. We didn't see the tether, so that's possibly just because they wanted to show off some of the other fairy gauge using skills, and of course the new means. It looked like the same amount of gauge generation from stacks of Ether Flow based on what XCOG did, which was only worth 10. We saw two different skills that were worth 20 each, and that's the end of the Scholar section. So we're just going to move on into Big Daddy Summoner, and oh boy, this got people very excited. So the immediate thing people noticed is they started the fight with zero, well, did they? With zero Ether Flow. And then immediately, like almost before you have time to register it, they cast Energy Drain. And unless something's changed, that Energy Drain just gave 2 Ether Flow stacks. So if that's not Energy Drain, I don't know what it is. But they also only have 2 now. So that's very different from Scholar, which looked to be entirely identical to the way they use Ether Flow XCOG. So already a pretty major change to be noticing. Again, we also made mention of the things during the live letter where pet actions have been consolidated, so regardless of which pet you're using, the player can actually tell the pet to use an action with one hotbar key, regardless of the summon that it actually is. And we also learned that summons would be instant cast, so swapping between them for various situations should be a much smoother experience for the summoner. Now, immediately after executing 2 different skills, you can see the summoner commands Garuda to do 2 separate things right there. Oh, that's an auto attack, and then commands to do the one thing, I suppose. Then immediately just goes into Dreadworm Trance. So there wasn't like this building of Dreadworm Ether, they just went into the Dreadworm Trance. And then from here, or not even into the Dreadworm Trance, I guess into Demi Bahamut overall. So wow, that's a hell of a thing. Look, just immediately into it. I guess they had it stored up because you can see the gauge is glowing, so that would have maybe meant they did Dreadworm Trance before the video actually began and then went into it. Otherwise, it would have to mean they left that Dreadworm Trance isn't there anymore. And not that I have a problem with that, because summoning is the thing summoners do, but Dreadworm Trance for me was always like the first time they stepped towards the summoner becoming a summoner, like the powering up for that one ultimate attack. But we got Demi Bahamut now, so what do we need that for? So you can see otherwise, Demi Bahamut looks to be functioning mostly the same. I don't really see much of difference. Still telling Bahamut to use his biggest attacks, and then swaps Garuda for Ifrit with an instant cast, and then Garuda goes. I think that's the Pain Flare animation. That looked like the Fester animation, and then so that was another thing. So use 2 of the Ether Flow stacks, and then used a new attack that wasn't Energy Drain, and like looks like a giant explosion, and generates 2. So the start of the animation looks like Energy Drain, but the rest of it doesn't. So it could be an AoE energy drain, but I guess energy drain by name makes sense if it would generate ether flow. But there's a new skill that also generates it. So they seem to have 2 options for generating their ether flow in combat now that are not the way they were before. Now, immediately upon leaving Demi Bahamut, most people would have noticed that the gauge actually changed in the bottom left. So you can see the summoner has Demi Bahamut right now. And as soon as the gauge changes, it changes into a Phoenix gauge. And this should be very apparent because of what happens only a few seconds later. But any second now, I should just maybe fast forward it. You see activates this like Phoenix phase right here. And you can see just all new attacks, basically. I just see all attacks that we've just never seen before. Revelation, attacks we've seen before, but not attacks we've seen a summoner use before. And it ends with the very familiar Phoenix ability, Revelation. So a new Phoenix phase for summoners as well. They don't let the bar actually tick down, so we see what the beginning of the, I guess, Phoenix generation process looks like. But it moved through those things so quickly, that section for summoner, that it looks to be like, you know, they're trying to cut down, I guess, on the crazy long openers. But that's only how it looks, because we didn't see a Dreadworm Trance. We didn't see what happens when Phoenix actually wears off. So there could be some major buildup into Phoenix, kind of like the major buildup into Demi Bahamut now. But without certain elements of the UI there, it's hard to really discern if that's going to be the case or if it's deceptively long compared to what you can actually see. Now, I said earlier Ninja was the second most excited I got. Machinist was the first most excited that I got when we got to this point in the job action trailer. I was blown away. I just don't even know what I'm looking at. So the first thing is we can see 2 gauges now, and we don't see any ammo anywhere. So luckily Yoshida gave us a little bit more information on Machinist, but only a little. He said that that gauge on the bottom is battery, and that you would use it to summon the thing that you're going to be seeing here in a little bit. They also said they kept heat, which is the gauge on the top. They said they had a very deep discussion about it, but you can see a lot. If you've played Final Fantasy VI, you should recognize a lot of these things. That's a Bioblaster. That's a flamethrower. Like, these are things any Final Fantasy VI fan should recognize immediately. That's an air anchor from Final Fantasy VI. Then we can see the more traditional combo skills that you guys should be familiar with. They did also mention during the live letter of removing the evolved skills state, which would, it either implies that the combos aren't RNG anymore, or that the actual abilities don't need to be heated. Now, if you actually look, that is the heated version of a skill, but his heat was only at 10. And then the heated version of that happens when he's only at, only going to 15. So that could be the statement Yoshida was making, that they removed the skill evolution. But without ammo, it's hard to tell if it's just going to be RNG. It could just be RNG in the form of a buff, or it could just be not RNG anymore. So not really much you can glean from that. But you can see the entire battery gauge disappears. Also, the what's it called? Barrel stabilizer, it looked like, is still there and still generates 50 heat. So you can see it right there. That's a familiar old skill. And then actually spends all of that battery gauge to summon this mech on the side right here, which then after a short kneeling process, which by the way, I gotta say, as much hype as I was to see this, the timer is ticking down from 20 seconds, and by the time that thing starts fighting, it's down to 15 seconds. That thing needs to move its ass, dude. You're wasting my battery gauge. So if that is how long it actually takes, and if it's not just because of the dramatic effect, come on, I mean, that's too much time for that thing to actually get into the battle, you know what I'm saying? So then it just starts it just starts flying up, and it just dashes forward and just starts punching the thing like crazy while the machinist just pops off all of its other skills. It's hard to even keep track of because there's just a lot of things going on visually here. You can see the attachment of wildfire right there, and then firing off some new skills. We see Gauss Barrel. We just see mad skills being fired off. It looked like it was what's it called? It was Gauss Barrel and Ricochet got fired off pretty close together right there between two of this new skill that we've never seen before. And then another thing that's really, really interesting. So you see right when the wildfire explodes, if you look at the machinist, it looks almost as if they did it themselves. Look, see? See the animation on the hand? Literally click something in the hand, and then the wildfire explodes. So you may have more control over your wildfire windows than we did before. Also, auto crossbow, if you're a fan of Final Fantasy VI, you should recognize that immediately. Drill, like these are all Final Fantasy VI things. And then execute something else in the hand, and then you can see like another thing on their hand, and then it sends out a signal, and we would assume that's what made the pet do the super attack there at the end. It looks freaking amazing. I don't know what just happened, but I liked all of it. That was my first reaction when seeing the job action trailer. I was like, I don't even know what just happened, but oh my goodness, dude. I can't wait. I can't wait. So then moving on to Dancer, I think this is the second to last job here. Now, this is another job they spent a lot of time talking about in the live letter and actually showcasing some of the gameplay. So again, we actually do have quite a bit that we can talk about here because of the live letter itself. So they actually showed off how the job kind of functions in combat. We saw a few skills and we saw a few potencies that have had some people riled up because they made a point of mentioning that while they were trying to lower party synergy overall so you could feel comfortable bringing any job, they also showed that Dancer had some insane utility with partying up with other people. They showed off a skill that allowed you to copy your buffs onto an ally. They showed the different buffs that you could do, which you can see them executing in the job action trailer here. And it seemed like it was very focused on, hyper buffing one ally and then providing some general benefits to the rest. That it almost reminds me of like old Bard. So it's a big question because they confirmed that Bard's crit buff was going away on its songs. So how much is Bard going to be a more supporty job like it kind of was in Stormblood? Or is it just going to be a song-focused DPS? These are questions that a lot of people have and that hopefully we'll be able to get into the nitty-gritty of when the embargo actually lifts. So for Dancer, though, you can see that it's unfortunate that the job action trailer doesn't use hotbars. It's for very obvious reasons. But you can see the Dancer executing through a series of dances if you look at their gauge in the bottom right. Every time they perform a step, there's these 4 different symbols here. You can see them filling up. And then upon filling all 4 of them, they execute some sort of attack that allows them to provide, seeing this giant buff. Now, in the live stream, Yoshida gave these skills names and showed him off using them, so we know a lot about how these buffs actually work prior to the embargo being lifted. He showed off a standard step and a more difficult step. Upon activating the standard step, which we'll see here, and again, he did show these and these names during the live letters, don't worry, you can see that he executes skill number 1, skill number 2, and then, there you go, skill number 2. Why did it take so long for the second skill? Hold on. So there's the first one. And then there's the second one. Oh, you can actually see at some point there that something flew from the samurai to the Dancer and it filled the gauge. So that I don't remember if there was any mention, because you do have to pick a dance partner with the skill that they mentioned on the live letter. So it seemed that that person is feeding resources into the dancer themselves. So having an alive dance partner is pretty important, I'd imagine. So on top of providing buffs to them, they're also providing stuff back to you, almost like, I guess, like a mini brotherhood in a sense. You can also see this little AoE effect that appeared around both the dancer and the samurai, and then you can see a few of their basic combo skills. Now, other than that, without going into too much detail on the live letter itself, you know, you can see the gauge. The gauge is filling up number-wise. You can see these various effects. You can see all those. Literally spent the first however long just buffing, and now they're going to start attacking. So you can see some of the skills we've seen in the previous trailers and stuff like that. You can see a massive spender right there of the actual gauge. You saw the gauge go down from 70 to 20 with this massive AoE that appears to there. See that? The giant massive AoE with all the blades dancing around. Also, you can see what looks to be another personal buff. You can see just throwing some I guess range attacks out, both of them looking like they caused little minor explosions. You can see that, and then one that follows up. And I also showed off the dash skill during the live letter as well, where you actually, it's like a skill that just lets you dash forward a small amount. Another charged action so they can move around the battlefield very elegantly. On top of that, you can see that there's these things generating here on the actual gauge itself. So you can see that if we go back a little bit, you can see that they spend that, and then they spend a second one. So they spent one on the first of those two skills, and then they generated one with this. So they actually said Dancer has two combat ranges, long range and short range. It seems like mostly the short range skills that he dashed in to do were mostly just like point blank AoEs based on the animations. So you can see those right here and generating the fans. And then also what looked to be a point blank, let's go back one more time. Looked to be a point blank AoE again at the end that also used one of those fans that are kind of along the outside of the job gauge. A lot going on there. It's hard to really discern anything. But Yoshida did go into much greater detail on a lot of that stuff in the live letter without giving away all too much. A lot of people got screen caps of a lot of tool tips for Dancer. But if we go into that, this video is going to be longer than it already is. So just know that May 29th, I'm going to be giving you all the deets on Dancer because I spent a lot of time on that one. And then finally, we get to the Dark Knight. Now, Dark Knight had a lot of people hype. They did confirm that Dark Arts is indeed gone. So there is no Dark Arts anymore for Dark Knight, so you don't have to spam it all the time. So what can we pull away from this? Well, we can pull away the little buff right there. We can pull away some sort of AoE shield, which doesn't seem to do anything, so we can assume it doesn't have really an offensive effect right there. It's very reminiscent of the TBN animation, except in a giant circle. You can see right here. It kind of reminds me of that. They plunge inwards. They do unleash. They do another AoE that generates 20 gauge. Again, at this point, we've seen the whole trailer. We've seen every other tank had a two-part AoE. Safe to assume that's going to be the same thing here. They have a new skill. Now, when they use that new skill, it actually activated a new gauge right here that starts ticking down for Dark Knights. And you can see they're, you know, just going through the standard stuff, you know, generating some of that blood gauge. You know, there's the Soul Leader combo. Then they execute another attack that sends the gauge up another 30 seconds. Then this was the skill that people actually were hype about the most. So as soon as he kind of digs into his own soul, you see that this gauge right here gets another meter on the side that actually starts counting down. And this is as people have been saying, it's their fray, as most people have been telling me that it is. And you just see it just using skills. You can't really make much out from this point other than seeing Quietus and then seeing some other skill right there that I don't know what it did because I can't see because there's so many flashy animations. And they just line them up. They line up the blood spillers. They line up the Carven Spits. It looks cool as hell. And then the clone goes away very peacefully. And that's the end of that. So that is the end of the job action trailer. And what we can glean from just this, plus some details from the live letter itself. Guys, there is so much more to talk about on Wednesday. So if you watching this and breaking it down are not excited enough, then Wednesday, check your subscription boxes as soon as you wake up because it is going to be a massive info dump. All of your favorite content creators who were invited to the media tour are going to be throwing information at you in all sorts of ways. and you should be excited for all of them. I would name them all off the top of my head, but holy moly am I going to forget somebody, because this is going to be massive. So let me know what you guys thought of the job action trailer. Were there any things I missed? Were there any things I got wrong? Be sure to put them in the comment section of the video below. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for Wednesday. I'm leaving this recording to go work on all the videos you guys are going to see Wednesday. So with that, thank you very much for putting up with me as I feigned a bit of ignorance as we got through the job action trailer. I'm ready to go. So let's go. I'll see you guys Wednesday. And until then, take care.